Hello, you're listening to Sending the Experts with Georgina Durrant. This podcast is all about teaching and supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, SEND. My name is Georgina Durrant. I'm the host of this podcast brought to you by Twinkle SEND. As a former teacher in Senko myself, I wanted to create a platform to share some of the amazing things that my guests are doing to support learners with SEND. So whether you're listening on your commute, tuning in whilst walking your dog, or curled up on the sofa with a nice cup of coffee, thank you so much for joining us. In this episode, I am delighted to be joined by Jo from Learn and Thrive. Jo is the CEO of Learn and Thrive, but most importantly, she is mum to a teenager with Down syndrome. Much of the inspiration for the Learn and Thrive charities projects come from her real-life experience of supporting a wide range of young people with Down syndrome throughout her work in the charity and education sectors. The charity provides free educational resources for the SEN community through two projects, which are Teach Me Too for the early years and Learning for Life for young people. I'm sure a lot of our listeners might have already heard of already, Jo. So hi, how are you?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. We've had a busy week kind of script writing, which is always one of my favourite things to do. So we're having a great week, thanks.
Wonderful. And these are the scripts, presumably, for the videos that you produce on there.
Yeah. So some more upcoming content that we're working on.
Wonderful, really exciting. So let's start with your background then. Tell us, I think we've alluded a little bit about it. You being a mum to a teenager with Down syndrome probably is part of your answer to this, but I'm still going to ask you, what led you to become the CEO of Learn and Thrive? What's your background?
Well, I kind of taken a different route into SEN education. So actually, I'm formerly trained as a physio, so worked in physiotherapy for a long time. I then had my daughter 15 years ago, and as a lot of us do at that point, decided that that was it. I was going to look into the education side, and actually then been working with children and young people, particularly with Down syndrome, but other learning needs as well, for the last kind of 10 years, running charities, then developing services to support their needs. So we've also been kind of working with schools and things like that. But really, the moving forward for being a CEO of Learn and Thrive itself was actually kind of sadly born out of a bit of fear and frustration on my part, to be honest, because like you said, I've got a daughter who's now nearly 16, which is slightly terrifying. But at the time she was, pre-teen, early teens. And we were desperately looking with the specialist teaching support unit that work with her. We were looking at ways of trying to prepare her for her future. And I think I was super aware of all those kind of really terrifying statistics. Children with disabilities are 4 times more likely to be, have abuse or, be neglected, and on all of those other things that with our guys, they are going to become vulnerable adults. And I think I was becoming super aware that I had this preteen that was not that far off becoming a young adult. And actually, we needed to make sure that all the nuts and bolts were there, and that we'd given her as many skills as possible to allow her to be able to thrive in later life. And what we found was that all the resources, and there are some brilliant resources out there, but were quite disjointed. You had kind of, as a parent, I felt like I was always scrabbling around for a little bit from here and a little bit from there, and this worked and this worked, and people would send me a worksheet on a thing. And actually, as a mum, but also as someone that works in education, it's really busy, and that was really tough for a lot of our guys. So I think a lot of the inspiration of starting Learn and Thrive for me was to try and bridge that gap and to try and put those resources in place.
And I suppose knowing that they're going to be high quality resources, ones that can be trusted, because that's another area, isn't it? You want to make sure that you trust them, and and also all in one place, like you say, so you're not having to look in different areas for different things, but you've got them all in one place, and you've done that job. It's there, and you can just access it, and you're ticking the right boxes and helping them. So tell us more about Learn and Thrive in particular, then, and what its aims are. I think you covered a little bit.
Yeah, so I suppose our vision at Learn and Thrive is a world where everyone with Down syndrome thrives. And I suppose we intend to do that by supporting them with access to the specialist support they need to be able to thrive. We use video-based lessons and all free downloadable resources to kind of empower the children and young people with Down syndrome, and adults, because we've got quite a lot of adults using our work as well, to live kind of full and safe lives. And that's what's really, really important to us. Having said that, that's where we started, and that's who we are, and it's who we will always be at our hearts. But actually now I would say between 45 to 50% of our users, particularly Learning for Life, don't actually have Down syndrome. They have other learning needs. So if we think and look at the learning profile of a person with Down syndrome and how they learn, and how we differentiate curriculum, and how we educate, actually, there's so much overlap with
Yeah.
lots and lots of other people, that actually we have a really high proportion of young people with autism, etc., using the resources now. So it's really brilliant, and we intend to stay at our heart designed for those with Down syndrome, but actually we are fully embracing and welcoming and clear that this isn't just for them. If it works for your learner, then absolutely pick it up.
Did you
And
expect that this
use
would
it.
happen, Jo? Did you expect that it would sort of branch out to autistic children, etc., or did you think it would stay?
Yeah, no, I think particularly with learning life, we knew it would, because
Yeah.
we did Teach Me Too during COVID, and so that was very much aimed at those with young, our early years foundation stage guys with Down syndrome, and that also then picked up an extra following as such. And actually, the learning for life stuff is even more based in those kind of key skills that are so vital to such a much wider range of young people and young adults that we knew it might. But we wanted to stay true to our heart of those Down syndrome, just because of the learning profile of those young people with Down syndrome, and actually that we could really focus on that. But absolutely, everyone is welcome, and it's been really brilliant working with them. So some of the stuff that we do for Learning for Life, so our how-to videos are now releasing, so how to be healthy and we're looking at those, and actually they are led and delivered and filmed with those with learning difficulties. So yes, a lot of those have Down syndrome, but some of them have other learning difficulties as well. So
Oh, it sounds wonderful what you're doing. It really does. So your charity predominantly, like you said, supports families and teachers of children and young people with Down syndrome. Just in case, I'm presuming prior knowledge, because there will be listeners, that might not know exactly what Down syndrome is. I think most people will, and we've had a previous episode on it, but it was a long time ago. Could you just explain to us what Down syndrome is, just in case there is somebody listening who's thinking, I don't know the full details of it, and perhaps like how many children in the UK have Down syndrome and sort of its prevalence?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Down syndrome is when a child is born with an extra chromosome. So you usually get that extra chromosome by chance, just because there's been some kind of change in the sperm or the egg before you were born. It's nothing to do with anything that anyone did or did before pregnancy or during pregnancy. It's absolutely just chance. And typically each cell in the body has 23 pairs of chromosomes. So you get half from each parent. So you get 23 from one parent, 23 from the other. So Down syndrome occurs when that baby is born with either a full or partial extra chromosome, a chromosome 21, which is why when you work with and you hang out with the Down syndrome community, the number 21 is everywhere for us. So we do everything on the 21st or something. There's all 21s everywhere, and a lot of the charities got 21 in their name. So that's why it's such a big thing for us. So having that extra bit of chromosome can then mean that pretty much everybody has some form of learning disability, and that can be different levels. It's associated with kind of heart conditions, speech and language needs, hearing and visual impairments. You can get things like difficulties with gut and endocrine and sleep, things like that. There's also a higher incidence of dual diagnosis of autism, and unfortunately also a much higher incidence of early onset dementia. Now, having said all those negative things, just because you have Down syndrome does not mean you are going to have all of those things. You may have one or two of those things. You may have all of them. It's such a wide range of needs, and particularly from the medical point of view, a real diverse kind of set of needs. So what we don't want to do is scare everyone and think, right, if you've got a baby with Down syndrome, they're going to have all these issues, because that's not true at all. But yeah, absolutely, that those things are more likely to happen than if you've got a typically developing child.
No, that makes sense. What about the common misconceptions? Because we've spoken about sort of the problems in a sense, but I remember speaking to Hayley Newman, and I'll get our listeners to listen back to this podcast if they're interested in Down syndrome, because we've got another podcast with Hayley Newman that was great at the start of the podcast, right at the beginning. So I think it was like 2 years ago now. And she was saying about when she was told that her daughter Natty had Down syndrome, she'd all sorts of like preconceived ideas of what Down syndrome was. And she was saying that she wished she could go back in time and see her amazing baby for exactly who she was at that time, instead of seeing this label of Down syndrome. So what sort of misconceptions are there? Because there are a lot out there, aren't they, about Down syndrome? Are there any myths you'd like to bust?
Oh, absolutely. And I remember following Hayley when my daughter was born, actually, and kind of following her journey through. So it was really lovely to kind of hear that again. But Yeah, absolutely. I think when, again, I was working as a physio when Beth and my daughter was born. And actually I had recently been working with groups of children with Down syndrome. So I really genuinely thought that I knew what
Yeah.
a child with Down syndrome was going to be like, what my life would be like, what it would look like. And actually one of the things I very, very quickly learned, that those huge assumptions that we make when we see our children and people out and about and doing things are just so difficult, aren't they? Because in my head, it was going to be this really, really super difficult journey. She was going to have all these additional medical needs, and she was going to have all of these learning needs, and that she, obviously, when you're working in physio and you want a child to do something they don't want to do, they're
Yeah.
not always the cheeriest of children when they come to see us. So actually, in my head, that's what Down syndrome was like.
Yeah, you were only seeing that sort of medical side of it and that having to make somebody do something that's difficult side, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's very much how I started it. And I'm one of those people, like I'm a big planner. So in terms of like, I like to, if I'm finding it's a barrier or there's something I'm finding difficult emotionally, what I will do is go out and typically buy an awful lot of resources. That's what I tend to do. If I'm
This
feeling
is
really,
me. This is what I would do as well, Jo,
yeah,
honestly.
if I'm thinking, oh my gosh, she's really struggling, right there, quick, let's go and do this. Let's put these things in place. So I found myself when she was born doing an awful lot of planning about when this child was going to be 21. And then you just think, this is madness. I didn't do this for any of my boys. I didn't look at this tiny baby and think, oh my gosh, where's she going to live? Um, and which is just madness, isn't it? And actually, I really wish I had spent more time now just enjoying her as a baby, because actually she was brilliant, easy baby. Like she was awesome as babies go. Like she was,
Yeah.
and she still is now, for clarify, but she's now a 15-year-old
But as a
girl.
baby in particular, it was yeah.
A very different way of looking at it. So the first thing when I'm actually talking to new parents, as I say, is just breathe, just
Yeah.
stop and breathe and take a moment to kind of be with your baby, because actually the rest of it can wait. You don't need to do all that kind of pre-planning. But in terms of the like preconceptions, I think I can say this for 95% of the Down syndrome community. And I want to kind of caveat with this with, we know it comes from a place of noble intent. We know people say it because they're being kind, but please don't say, oh, aren't they loaves? Aren't they so loving?
Yeah.
Because we die slightly inside when that happens, because you think, oh, and it's a really tough one for us, because there's two sides to this. Everyone kind of thinks, oh, they're so loving, which actually simply isn't true. They've got absolutely the same breadth of emotion as everybody else. So when they're not being loving, they can be just like any other child. And that's really important. But also, there is a slightly darker side to this, is actually there is an element of a truth in it, that actually a lot of our community do come across as being so loving. And that's actually because one of their learning strengths and their learning profile is actually can be very, very aware of other people's emotions. And
Um,
they also really, really try and seek out and enjoy interaction with others.
yeah.
So they very quickly learn that if you crave social interaction with another person and you want to get the kind of reaction you want to get, being loving and giving them big hugs and kisses and whatever else when you're 3, when you're 4, when you're 5, absolutely gets you what it is you're seeking. It gets that emotional interaction with an adult, which is lovely when you're 4.
Yeah.
When you're 24 and
Yeah.
you're still going out and giving everyone and giving the postman a hug, or giving the support worker a hug, or you're doing all these things, and unfortunately, again, you've then put them in a really vulnerable
Yeah.
space.
I was just
And
gonna
actually, what
say.
we've done is kind of allow them to put their own identity and their own needs and their own wants to one side, because they're getting this interaction that they want by being this type of person.
Yeah.
So for us, again, within Learn and Thrive as well, it's really important that we do a lot of work around self-identity, like
Hmm.
things that they like, they don't like, who they are, and actually being able to express their own wants and needs in a way that actually gets that across. Because a lot of our guys just won't. They'll just tell you what they think you want to hear,
Yeah.
because they want that positive interaction.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it
That's a
is a
tricky one,
preconception,
isn't
but
it? Yeah, and also I suppose it's not helpful if people keep saying it as well, because it makes it more likely for the children to be like that. If we keep
yeah.
telling them they are loving, it makes you think, oh right, that's my identity, rather than, like you say, them working out who they are themselves and
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
labeling them for them.
absolutely. And I think the other thing at the moment, which again is a bit of a catch-22, and again I caveat it with, I support it wholeheartedly and it's brilliant, is the awesome increase in representation we've seen of people with Down syndrome in the media,
Yeah.
you know, in life, we're really celebrating now all of the things that our guys can achieve. You know, you've got people presenting CBeebies, you've got actors, you've got people going to Parliament, you know, all absolutely brilliant things. But it does mean we do kind of have a bit of a section of the Down syndrome community that are looking at those role models and looking at that message that is being put out and saying, kind of, that doesn't actually look like my life. I don't know if I actually relate to this, because actually, like we've said before, in terms of the effects, it can be quite wide ranging. So I think, again, something we're really keen on Learn and Thrive is because we use children, young people and adults with Down syndrome and other learning needs within the videos, that we do absolutely everything we can to represent a wider group and making sure that those with more complex needs are still being celebrated for the brilliant individuals they can be, and also putting in goals that are, you know, make it clear that the goal is not always to be a independently living, working individual, because actually for a lot of our guys that may not be the case, but actually they may get further and further along that journey, and that's brilliant. So for us, that's really important to kind of make sure we're bringing everyone along with us and not just kind of one particular more able group.
That's a really tricky one, isn't it, Jo? Because like you say, it's brilliant that we've got like people with Down syndrome on CBeebies and representing in Parliament and all of these sorts of things. It's fantastic. But then, like you say, there is that side to it that, yeah, you're not saying this is what you've got to achieve to, yeah, it's really tricky. And I suppose it sort of resonates across the whole SEND community as well, doesn't it? Not just for Down syndrome. I know, like in the autism community as well, it's a similar problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the Teach Me To project, so you've got the two projects. The first one, the Teach Me To, is for early years children. And is that the one that sort of came about during sort of lockdown? Is that right?
Yeah, so Teach Me To came out of COVID, and before Learn and Thrive was actually a charity of its own. So it actually came out of another charity called 21 Together, which is a Kent-based Down syndrome charity that we also started when my
You do
daughter
a
was
lot, Jo.
my daughter was young. So and that actually delivers direct support to children and young people. So we have specialist teachers, speech language therapists, etc., delivering support on the ground. And we found that a lot of our preschoolers had then obviously gone into lockdown, and where they're typically developing peers were getting work and activities and things to do at home to kind of continue their learning. A lot of our guys were a bit like, we don't really know what to do with you, so they just weren't being sent much at all when they weren't getting the input. So we very kind of quickly put together our first set of Teach Me To videos with Inclusively Downs, who are a specialist teaching service nationally, who are absolutely brilliant. We work with all the time as well. So they just put together what started off as being 10 videos, looking at some key areas of the EYFS and delivering them in a way that was suitable. So almost like carpet time. So they're doing the teaching. And the idea was that the parents could sit and support the child doing the session, and you know, any resources that they needed, we sent off as well. I think we made about 25 of these big packs and sent them out to families. So they could do that alongside. And what we very quickly then found was that suddenly people outside of camp found out about it. Oh, can we have this too? And we're like, oh, okay, this wasn't the plan. Okay, so very quickly that grew. So we then started working with speech and language therapists, Symbol UK and Key Communication. We also work with Makaton and Numicon as well. So what we tend to do is, which is good for me, is, you know, we are not necessarily the experts. You know, we are the people, we are the organisation. So Learn Thrive is the organisation. We find the most appropriate expert in the community to come and build that particular module of work.
Yeah.
So there is, you know, a real wide range across the EYFS, but there's a really, really strong speech and language threads on the Teach Me To programme, really aimed at those preschoolers through to kind of leaving infant stage, and looking at building the confidence of TAs and parents and community workers to then be able to deliver that themselves, and just to change the way that they work and interact with children, because even the pacing of it, and you know, looking at all those little things where it takes the pressure off, doesn't it? Whereas you go to a course and you learn about it, you've got to then go back and implement it. out of what you remember, which we all remember.
Yeah.
We all know is not very much out of courses. You do your course, you come back, you need to consolidate it, don't you? Whereas this, you do it alongside, it takes that pressure off, particularly for those staff kind of with less experience. We found came out really confident about working with the children and young people. So our next project is working with Maths for Life, which
Brilliant.
is a brilliant project looking at maths and all the way through, particularly looking at the SND community. In fact, we're doing dragon boat racing in Kingston in July to raise funds to film that project, because obviously everything is free, so we are a charity.
Yeah.
And so, and we're particularly looking for kind of those young people with SEND to come and join us and get on the boats. We did it last year. It was absolutely brilliant. We had quite a few guys with Down syndrome in the boats, kind of alongside their peers or some businesses that got involved and things like that. So it's really that kind of message of inclusion, and it is a really good giggle. So
I've been to a dragon boat race once when I was a kid, and it was amazing with the drum. Do we still have the drum at the end? I just remember the noise and the atmosphere was great. That sounds brilliant.
My daughter was on the drum last year, so we weren't necessarily paddling in time to the drum because she was having just a brilliant time.
Having a little go. Why not?
Absolutely.
But that's the Teach Me To project sounds incredible. I love how it began as well, because you're so right. Like during that first lockdown, through no fault of teachers, everything had to be scrambled together quite quick, didn't it? We didn't know what was happening. No one knew how long it was going to last. Obviously, we didn't know how long schools were going to be initially closed, and then I know they were open for key workers, but children of key workers. But a lot of the resources that were sent home, because of the way you could send them home, it was an email and it was worksheets, and even just for younger children, it was very difficult to access them, because that's not the sort of way that they learn, and teachers must have felt very conflicted sending them home, thinking, well, I'm sending this because I need to, but I know that's not how they're not going to do this worksheet, because that isn't how I would teach them.
Yeah,
it's a really tricky time. So I think you've filled an important gap there, Jo.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, it has been great actually, Teach Me To. And I think what's been great now is that schools have picked it up. So we did do a independent review with Hertfordshire as a local authority, putting Teach Me To into their schools, and letting the particularly teachers and TAs using it. And what really came out of that was that confidence boost.
Yeah.
And learning, and actually understanding the learning profile a bit better, and understanding how to support those children and young people in a way where they, obviously we would recommend that everyone goes off and gets proper training, but if you can't got that, this is an interim way of doing that.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. So I read on your website, and I think you've mentioned it as well, that children with Down syndrome have a specific learning profile with their own strengths and weaknesses. And you said that research shows that certain strategies are very effective for people with this profile. So obviously all children and young people are unique, but what strategies for teachers who are listening who may have a child with Down syndrome in their class, what strategies can you recommend? And I appreciate this is quite a general overview, because they are, and obviously everyone is unique, but yeah, if they're thinking, how can I support this child, is there any top tips you have?
Yeah, and I think I'll caveat this like with this could be a 6-week training course, or certainly a 2-day training course.
Joe to summarize it.
I'm going to give you literally a whistle-stop tour. I think the first thing I would say is it is not a global delay. That is the most important thing people need to understand. Is just because you have Down syndrome does not mean that you have that you are the same across the board in terms of cognition and how you're thinking and your learning skills, etc. It is not that, and that is really, really, really important. And I would say that you really should go and get training, particularly around that, and it's really important. Now, the big key features is our guys with Down syndrome are actually brilliant visual learners, really good visual learners, which actually then links into they need a very different approach to reading. And as we know, reading is the key to the curriculum. Reading is the very, very good reason, really emphasized in those early years. And actually, our guys do need a different approach to reading. Now, normally we wouldn't say, when we're talking about differentiation, to do anything different, but we would just say to teach the same thing differently rather than to do something different. Actually, for our guys, this is the one kind of exception to that, where really they do need to be looking at a proper reading program for our guys with Down syndrome. They should also be starting reading much earlier than they're typically developing peers. They should not be waiting until reading readiness does not work for our guys. They've done some research into reading readiness for those with Down syndrome, and for some of our guys, if you waited for reading readiness you'd never teach them to read. But if you did just crack on and did it, they would get the same level of reading as somebody else.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are waiting for the behaviour to be there. They're waiting for those next steps to be there before they start.
Yeah.
And actually, what we find with our guys is reading is the key to all those other things.
Yeah.
So particularly speech, some people that haven't got the speech to be able to learn to read. Well, actually, a lot of our guys learn to speak through reading.
Yeah.
So if you wait to learn to read, to speak, then actually not only you keep holding them back in terms of their reading, you're probably holding their speech back too.
Yeah, because the links are so fundamental.
Yeah. So it's looking at actually those kind of that match select name approach to whole word reading and having whole word reading back on the table. And that's not to say you don't teach phonics. You do still continue to teach phonics, but it is done, quite differently alongside in terms of the reading.
Yeah.
The other kind of quick ones would be always kind of assume age appropriate behaviour. With support, it can be achievable. And there is a natural assumption, again, that they're not ready for that, or not ready to sit and do that activity. They're not ready to be at the table with their typically developing peers doing that thing. But actually, again, all the research shows that children with Down syndrome learn hugely through role models and behaviour modelling. So if they are amongst those that are doing that, you've got much more chance of them sitting and doing that. And actually getting on and being able to manage that. Obviously, there's support that needs to be done. It might not be for quite so long, or it might be with, any kind of behaviour management strategies in place. We're not suggesting that they should just get on and do it. But they should have those opportunities. And one of our biggest things that we find, particularly in primary schools, is where you've got year 1, year 2, year 3 children kind of going back down to early years for the afternoon to give them a break, or to do some sensory play, or to do some physical play, or for really good reasons. We're not saying they're not good reasons, but actually what they don't realise they're doing is they're absolutely undermining everything they've done in the morning.
Yeah.
So not only are they kind of taking those children out, putting them somewhere else, you're breaking up the links between that peer group, so they don't really feel part of the class. They then go down in the afternoon and see people behaving in a totally different way, and come back and behave like that in the year 2 classroom and find themselves in trouble. And actually what we find is it really accelerates that need, that difficulties with inclusion. So if you really want to include children and young people with Down syndrome, we would absolutely say there's pretty much no reason why you should be accessing a younger year group. You can find those opportunities to do the other things in other ways.
Yeah, I think that's very important.
Yeah, and I think the other kind of, I won't do any more after this because I could go on forever, but the big and bold is a real nice, easy one for people to pick up. So we've got a big and bold campaign, which the DSA ran, which I think is really important. Even if your child you're working with is wearing glasses and is fully corrected vision, they will have visual acuity difficulties. Everybody with Down syndrome does, which means if they're looking at a picture or a page we're writing, it is going to be slightly fuzzier, slightly kind of lighter. They're not going to have the definition around the edges, which means when you're choosing reading books and you've got words that are written over pictures, or you're looking at, photocopies of worksheets, or you're using resources, it's, again, just keeping that in mind, that kind of, you do need to be big and bold, which we do for so many of our guys anyway. But as they get older, that tends to disappear. Actually, our guys still need it.
Yeah, that's really important. That's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah. So the real message is go and find real, like the actual. If you've got a guy, one of our guys coming, then actually it really is worth looking at the DSA, Down syndrome International, looking at those other groups to go and get proper training.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's really, really useful. So you also, at the other end of the age spectrum, you've got Learning for Life programme, which is really interesting. We've kind of touched on it a bit, but let's tell us more about this. And I think these secondary resources sort of focus more on emotions, friendship, health and puberty, don't they? So yeah, I'm intrigued to know why you've chosen that area and why it's so important, although I think I know.
Yeah, well, yeah, because it's clearly a real passion for me. And there are, like I said, there's some great stuff out there. There's the Alex Kelly Talk About series, which is brilliant. The Family Planning Association do some great work. But for us, it was all about being able to provide the learning resources needed that hit the primary RSE curriculum, and actually probably go beneath that as well. We actually go to kind of looking at the foundation blocks that build knowledge into that, but delivered in a way that is age appropriate for older learners. Yeah. Realistically, we have so many 14, 15, 22-year-olds that still haven't quite got that concept of public and private, or they haven't really understood the kind of appropriate touch, or the growing up, or, you know, particularly their emotions, being able to label their own emotions, other people's emotions. Friendships and relationships is a massive way of doing it. And actually our guys really do need explicit teaching on this. And a lot of the subjects are kind of, we assume that they'll learn through inference, don't we? Particularly around, we might talk about friends a little bit, then we all move on. And we assume that they'll figure it out between them.
Pick things up from like TV and from their friends, and you think they're sort of getting it, but then I suppose they're getting not the right information perhaps.
No, and actually our guys don't learn by inference very well. They don't take on that information and then think, oh, what would I do? They just take on that information and go, brilliant. No.
Moving on.
They haven't then done that next step. So actually generalizing is really hard for our guys. So we need to make sure that we're teaching it really, really specifically. But also doing it in a way that is enabling them to use it practically. So we do a lot of work, particularly in our friendship module, is a pretty good example, where actually the activities they're doing include role-playing situations. So they'll go and role play repairing a friendship, or making
brilliant.
Or even ending friendships. So we're doing, again, as you can tell, safeguarding is a really key thread for me and for the charity. So we do a lot of work around identifying what is a healthy relationship, what is an unhealthy relationship, and what do you do if you're in an unhealthy relationship? Like, what options can you choose? And then role modeling that out. So really taking it down to its bare bones and actually giving them the skills to do something about it.
So useful, that really is. I must admit, I watched your videos on like public and private spaces. I watched that one, and it's fantastic. The lady who presents it is so good, isn't she? She manages to strike the balance of being sort of, she's speaking very clearly and explaining things, but not patronizing, which I think can be really tricky to achieve, because she's explaining the basics of it, and you think, oh, this content might come across as quite patronizing to an older child, but for some it doesn't, does it? She seems to manage to balance it perfectly. I was really, really impressed in how she explains it, and she's just very clear and goes into detail. And but yeah, I don't know, fantastic. I really think your videos are brilliant.
Oh, good, that's great. And that's really what it is aimed at, is those guys. And we actually use it in groups of young people down here in Kent. And what we found is our younger learners have picked it up pretty quick. So our kind of early teens picked it up quick. The ones that have really struggled to pick up the concepts have been our older learners.
Oh, wow.
And it's been because it's been forgotten. They've talked about it in year 6, they might talk about year 7, year 8, and they've gone through, and actually it's gone off the radar. People have started moving on to the next stage. And we, you know, I've had a young man, well, there's so many stories of people that we've worked with, but a young man that got excluded from school in year 9, I think year 8 or 9, because of sexualized behavior. You know, so, and actually he didn't realize that. Actually, when we dug down into what had happened was, you know, he's sitting on a table doing his work. He doesn't like the work, it's boring. So whatever it is he's doing, he wasn't keen. And a teacher walked past and he wants to get their attention, so he's given her a good pat on the bottom, because actually the bottom was the height that his head was at. He wasn't
the nearest thing.
He wasn't actually patting her bottom, he was patting her. It just happened to be and then essentially what happened was, you know, all hell broke loose slightly. So then he did it again, because then he got the interaction he wanted and didn't have to do the work to do.
And then because of his age, it's presumed that he's doing it for a different
reason. And actually we dug down into it, and he just didn't understand. Everyone kept saying to him, you can't do that, that's not okay. No one had actually said, because that's a private part of the body, and no one actually dug down to those little bits. So it gets forgotten. I think people move on and they forget those really important foundation skills.
No, that makes complete sense. It really does. And I can imagine there being some misconceptions around that, because you do teach it and then you presume when they get to sort of the teenage years that then they know it, don't you? And they go off, or you've already given them the information. But so I suppose for a lot of this, it's repeating it, is it? And going through it regularly.
Yeah, it's repeating it. And what's lovely about the videos is it's got the actual teacher. The explicit teaching is done for you with either with Lucy or James or Amanda, whoever's presenting those particular videos. But then there are lots and lots of activities. So all the activities, it now says pause the video, go and do the activity. And then off they go, which is brilliant. And that builds the kind of the nuance to it. So they then get those opportunities to go and have the conversation. and then to build all the, because no family is the same, is it? So there's no point us saying on a video, this is how you should, this is appropriate touch for your family, this is appropriate touch for your culture. You know, they're all different, and we have to be mindful of that. So the activities are designed for them to go away and individualize to the pupil's own circumstance and culture and background and family, etc. But also to spark further conversation. So the idea is that even if you don't, you know, you can come back and do the videos, and absolutely do. Some of them love doing that. But even if you then taking the resources on and kind of bringing those back out every now and then and going, oh, should we have a little look at these things that we talked about, a sorting activity about who's a friend, what's not a friend. And I think particularly part of that for me is that idea that teaching it once and teaching it in a structured environment is absolutely vital, but it's not enough. So if you've been doing that piece of teaching, it's then you being able to go out on the playground when their friendship is breaking down and go, oh, do you remember we did that?
It's making the links, isn't it, and bringing it back. And
do you remember we did that? Or we could go back in. Should we go back in and have a quick look at that sorting activity about what is appropriate to what to do? And can you understand why they felt like that emotion? Let's get the emotion cards out. And then let's just look at why that might have happened.
It's almost like it's woven through everything, isn't it? Rather than just being an add-on, like a tick box that you do your RSE and you think, right, we've done that, we tick that box, we can move on now for another year. It's not, is it? It's got to be throughout everything. And like you say, revisiting it each time something crops up and going back to the resources. What would you recommend then for like a teacher or a parent who isn't feeling very confident about talking about puberty and relationships, especially if they're wondering like when to broach the subject of puberty and relationships with learners who have SEND?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's useful about this project is it kind of does all the bringing it up for you. So you don't have to have that really awkward, let's talk about periods conversation of today we're going to do erections. No, you don't have to sit down and do that, because it kind of does it for you and builds coming through. So actually those conversations are started. And the other thing I would say, and there's something that I've had to do a lot and the staff have to do a lot, because obviously we do a lot of working with the resources, is just practicing saying the words that are awkward.
Well, even when you just said those words then, Jo, I giggled, didn't I? So it's
exactly
true.
But we, you know, we'll do sessions where we're doing about the resources around kind of periods and erections, things like that, and we'll have like an office full of just symbols and things, and it's really hard as grown-ups to like take it seriously, but also it's enabling not being scared of the real words. So I think often when children are little, we teach them different ways of talking about their private parts, you know, and actually what you've then done is not necessarily teach them the honest truth. So I think for our guys, we would be saying actually just be clear, just be honest and clear, and you don't have to go to any further than you want to go in that discussions with a child. But actually, at least if you're calling a penis, then at least when you get to that stage, actually you can then start talking about the next steps and what that might look like, because there's no point protecting our children when they're young, because there's actually nothing wrong with it. And actually all we're doing is being very specific and clear and honest about what we're doing and what language we're using. So I would say that it's never too early to start those early things, particularly around relationships and emotions and attaching emotions, because again, puberty is coming earlier and earlier, as we know. You know, some of our guys are not going to get all the way through puberty. Like people with Down syndrome, that's again a bit of a myth that they hit puberty later. Absolute myth. They don't at all. So some of our girls are going to hit puberty before they leave primary school. And if no one's taught them around, you know, periods, then what are we setting them up for? They can say, oh, well, they're not ready to understand it yet. Well, tough, it's coming, whether they
is it them that's not ready, or is it us that's not ready to talk to younger children about it? I think that's it, isn't it?
Exactly. So on the Teach Me Too project, we do signpost the NSPCC Pants Rule campaign, etc. So they're doing that from really, really early. But we would certainly say, be brave, practice the words when you're not there so you don't giggle, because it's really hard. And actually it's never too early to start having those conversations. And what we're currently delivering is the primary curriculum. So we aren't talking about intercourse or the scientific side of actual sex, but we are very, very much based in the emotions, the relationships, friendships, what is safe and unsafe now, so that when we do finally kind of get round to building, and that is the plan, to keep building when we get to that stage, that they have the building blocks to be able to understand it, because you can't just rock in and start talking about sex when they hit year 7. Because
No.
if you haven't done the rest of it and they haven't understood it, that's when you get sexualized behavior, and that's when you get difficulties because they haven't got the base and the concepts.
Yeah.
So yeah, be brave would be my first tip.
Fabulous. You have been an absolutely brilliant guest, Jo. Honestly, I've learned so much about everything.
Oh, thanks.
I really, really appreciate it. Tell us what links you want. I'll put some links from Twinkle because we'll no doubt have some resources on RSE that will be really useful. So there'll be links for anyone listening. There'll be links if you scroll down on your phone or on your computer. There's links at the bottom of this episode. And then if you look on YouTube, they'll be down here with some links as well. So what links would you like us to pop on?
So the website's the best one, so that's learnandthrive.org.uk.
Yeah.
And then we're on Facebook, so we're Learn and Thrive UK on Facebook, and we've got some community groups on there as well, where you can kind of come in and ask particular questions about the learners that you're working with, etc. And then we are on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn as well. So we're pretty much everywhere. You can find us.
Fantastic. Well, thank you ever so much. You've been a brilliant guest. Really, really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us.